here today to learn more about the story of Adam Walsh, a child who was abducted and killed. And Willis Morgan has written 2 books. We've already had you here once. When was that? About 2019? Something like that?
No, I was at the Pembroke Pines Book Club. That was in 2014.
Oh, okay, okay. And anyway, he's got a book called Frustrated Witness, and he has done a lot of research about the case. And it's a very interesting book. We have one, and that's one of the things that's in our red basket. And he donated that. He donated a coffee cup. I put some Starbucks coffee in there and some cookies. So, would you like to join us and give us your lecture, please?
All right, as Karen said, my name is Willis Morgan, and yes, I'm not only the author of this book, I am also one of the many witnesses that were at the Hollywood Mall on the day Adam Walsh was abducted. And what makes this book unique compared to my first edition back in 2015 is that in this book, I have QR codes where you can scan them and go straight to my website. When I did the original book, I wanted to include a DVD in the book, but I couldn't find any publishing company that would do that. But now with technology, I'm able to do it with QR codes. And not only do I have a QR code in there for my websites, but also I have many QR codes throughout the book of other witnesses at the point where they are mentioned in the book. So you could hear them from their own words doing radio shows and podcasts. So this book is different because I've never seen another true crime book that has QR codes throughout the book. In 1981, I was working for a newspaper, the Miami Herald.
Bring the microphone closer to you.
Oh, is it? Okay. Okay. In 1981, I was going on my 10th year at the Miami Herald. Anyway, I was working at the Miami Herald going on my 10th year. This photo, in fact, is for my 10th year anniversary photo. And you can see this is a dated photo if you look at this printer here, which had the perforated sides and the box of paper was at the bottom and it fed through up into the printer. Also, you'll notice this antiquated monitor here. And behind me here is nearly half the wall is covered with a production counter that would count all the papers from the presses. For example, the Broward edition was about 100,000 for Broward County, and we typically had about 4 presses running that edition. The Broward edition was about 100,000, and this press would keep track of all 4 presses, and when they reached the 100,000, it would bring them down. And now, my cell phone calculator has 100 times more capacity than this whole calculator here. And you can see this rotary phone. See, for me, 1981 doesn't seem that long ago, but when I look at this photo and see the technology, how antiquated everything was, we had a rotary phone here to call. And the Miami Herald, being the largest newspaper, always kept up with the latest in technology. So I was able to get me one of the new touch-tone phones where you just touch these buttons and you can call somebody without the rotary dial. And how cool was that? Anyway, I mean, what will they think of next, right? So, okay, back in 1981, we were working a 4-day work week, 10-hour shifts, 4 days a week. And my off days were Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And on July 27th, 1981, was my middle day off on a Monday. I decided to go to Walden's bookstore in the Hollywood Mall. and then go to lunch at the German deli. Right. You remember the German deli?
Absolutely.
Right. Originally it was called Lawson's, if you go back far enough, and then they expanded to like 3 different stores and renamed the Hollywood Mall Delicatessen. But it was affectionately called the German deli because they sold predominantly products from Germany. Anyway, after browsing around Walden for about 20 minutes, I decided to go down to the German deli. But since Radio Shack was on the same side of the corridor as I was walking on, I decided to stop off in Radio Shack. And this is the Radio Shack, even though it's long been closed and the sign has been removed. I added that sign on there with a paint bucket program. And these here were also other stores that have been boarded up. So at that time, this was the only part of the mall that was left. And now this is even gone, so everything is gone now. Okay, when I was in Radio Shack, I went to the right side of the aisle, and there was this red tag sale table right here. And I stopped and I saw some items on the table, and I was looking at them when this disheveled-looking young man came into the Radio Shack. He stood right at the entrance first. I looked up and I saw him standing there, and he tried to start a conversation with me. He said, "Hi there, nice day, isn't it?" And I ignored him because I was thinking that if you say anything, it would initiate more conversation. So I just ignored him. But instead of leaving, he came into the Radio Shack, came right up to me, and continued trying to initiate more conversation. In fact, I even looked over to see where the store clerk was, and I saw he was like way in the back putting things on a shelf. So I just stood there and I ignored this guy. Eventually, he finally stomped out of the Radio Shack. This is the guy right here that approached me, and he turned around and stomped out of the Radio Shack like he was really upset for my lack of a response. But he looked very dangerous to me. As you can see in this photo, this doesn't look like somebody you want to start a conversation with. So I went to the Radio Shack entrance, and I was watching him because I was thinking this guy was desperate for someone to be with and talk to. So I was keeping an eye on him. And Radio Shack, as you saw in the previous photo, is at the north end of the Hollywood Mall. So there's really only one way to go, and that's deep into the mall or out the north door. But I was keeping a distance from him when I was watching him. I actually saw him walking into Sears, and I walked to the point where he turned, and I watched him walk to the west side of Sears and into the toy department. And I stood there for a minute wondering what this guy was doing in the toy department. And then I'm thinking, well, he must be playing the video games because he's not coming back out. And then I realized when he does come back out, he's going to come my way, not wanting another encounter with this guy. I turned around and left. In fact, that encounter I had was so bizarre that I was going to tell some employees at Sears to call security or the police because there was some crazy guy walking around in the store. But then I was thinking, there were no laws against being crazy. And what are the police going to do? Right. So I just left and went home. It was that very same evening, I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when I heard on the news, because I had the TV on in the living room, about a boy that went missing. And then they mentioned the Hollywood Mall. And I'm thinking, I was there today. And then they mentioned Sears. And I ran into the living room, I started listening to this. Then they mentioned the toy department and the time of day, which they said was around 12:30, between 12 and 12:30. And then that's when I knew, that guy did it. I knew it had to be that guy. I didn't know his name, he never told me his name. So all I know is I've never followed anybody in my life. For me to follow this guy from Radio Shack all the way to the toy department, there was no question in my mind that it had to be that guy. The next day I went and I told some friends and my neighbor about the encounter I had, because this was everywhere in the news, this story. And they suggested I go to the police department, but I didn't go. On Wednesday, I went back to work. And of course, I work for a newspaper, like I said, and so this was a big story in the newspaper, front page story. And so everybody's talking about it at work, and I was telling coworkers about the incident I had, and they implored me to go back to the police department. They said I need to go to the police department. So on Thursday morning, when I got off work, on Thursday I went to the Hollywood Police Department, and they're at the same location they are now, right across the street from the Hollywood Mall. I walked into the lobby, and I went up to a window where there was a young lady standing behind the window, and I started telling about the incident I had, and she stopped me and said, they have a special desk set up just for that case. And she said, I need to go talk to the officer. He was sitting by the elevator there at a desk. He seemed to be a regular police officer in a black uniform. And I was telling him about the incident, but he didn't seem interested in anything I had to say. All he wanted to know is if I got a tag number, and I explained to him that I didn't go outside. This incident occurred inside the mall. And then he wanted a receipt to prove I was there. And I told him I didn't buy anything. So he asked me a few questions about the suspect, you know, the height, weight, age, which I told him was about 20 years old, 6 feet tall. 10 years later, I would find out he was 21 years old, so I wasn't far off. And then he dismissed me. He said, well, if we need you, we'll call you, but they've never called me. And then soon after, here, this is the diagram that I put together here. This is the Radio Shack. And this is the path to the mall that he took. When he stomped out of Radio Shack, he came down here, went into Sears through this entrance, the hallway entrance. He went this way, and he went right up this way into the toy department. And this is the boy that was abducted, Adam Walsh. It was all over the news, the Miami Herald, and all the TV shows. And this is Adam here, wearing the same shirt that he wore the day he was abducted. And this is the wanted poster that came out shortly after his abduction. And this was a reenactment on TV of the abduction. The reenactment was completely inaccurate because the story they had at the time was that a security guard put Adam out of the store. And he was abducted from the outside of the store, but that's not what happened, because decades later, I would track down all the other witnesses, and Adam was dragged out of the store. The security guard never even showed up till about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes after Adam was already gone. So that was a false narrative, and that is still to this day the narrative that they're going with. I have multiple witnesses that saw Adam being dragged out of the store. In fact, Adam was protesting as much as a 6-year-old kid could, saying that, you're not my daddy, I don't want to go, you're not my daddy. As Jeffrey Dahmer dragged him out of the store and threw him into a blue van. Multiple witnesses saw the blue van as well. And they went and pinned this on an innocent man that had absolutely nothing to do with it. There we go.
What would you do if your 6-year-old son was abducted and murdered, and the police refused to investigate? That's exactly what happened in the Adam Walsh case. Although investigators attempted to do an investigation in the beginning, it was so incompetent that once Jeffrey Dahmer was captured in Milwaukee for gruesome crimes he committed, Jack Hoffman, the lead investigator in Adam's case, decided not to make the connection to Adam in order not to reveal the full scale of incompetence in the Adam Walsh investigation. Much like the Milwaukee Police Department did in not making the connection to Dean Vaughn, who was murdered in the same building where Jeffrey Dahmer was living. They didn't want the public to know how many times they were in the Oxford building, All because of the many stink complaints, apartment break-ins, and an ongoing murder investigation that was taking place during a time when they gave a small child back to Dahmer after he escaped. According to former FBI agent Neil Pertel, the Wisconsin investigators had already made the Walsh-Dahmer connection the same day Dahmer was arrested. A timeline put together by police showed that Dahmer had indeed been in South Florida the day Adam Walsh was abducted. Pertel said he immediately called Florida police to say, "You gotta look at this, because this guy is someone who is living in your area, and he had already killed prior to coming into your area."
The Walsh case soon turned cold until Dahmer's arrest 10 years later, and his front-page photos sparked a flurry of calls to police claiming Dahmer was Adam's abductor.
Dahmer was there. 4 people who were at that mall identified him after he was arrested by Milwaukee police. They saw his photograph and said, "That's the guy that we encountered."
Dahmer denied killing Adam, so police ruled him out and closed the Walsh case 3 years ago without new evidence, blaming it on another dead serial killer. The former FBI profiler believes Dahmer is the more likely suspect.
With a weak imagination to think a person like this now let loose and drinking a lot and unemployed and stressed out in Florida wouldn't have engaged in something. Just would be a lead.
Willis Morgan, the author of Frustrated Witness, 2nd edition, reveals the full scale of the investigative incompetence and cover-up in Adam's abduction and murder. Their credo seemed to be, when you mess up, never fess up, says Morgan. For more information, go to frustratedwitness.com.
Okay, this photo I added here because I thought it was kind of ironic to see that this, what appears to be a 3-year-old boy, would grow up to murder this boy. This is Jeffrey Dahmer here when he was a young child. And, right, you notice his hand here is around the kitten's throat? So what does that say? At this young age. And 10 days after Adam was abducted, his severed head was found in a canal in Vero Beach. And newspaper articles were coming out, and they were giving the suspect a moniker. They were calling him the Indian River Beheader. And 10 years later, Jeffrey Dahmer would get a new moniker as the Milwaukee Cannibal. But actually, back in 1981, most people don't realize that he was the Indian River Beheader. And as I said earlier, composites started coming out. And after I went to the Hollywood Police Department and they dismissed me, I never called them back. I never went back to them because my thinking was, when I saw some of the composites, this is just one of them here, come out, I thought, well, I could never do any better in a composite. And whoever gave this composite saw the same person I saw. So my thinking was, well, I didn't get a tag number, and I didn't buy anything to prove I was there, so what more could I do? They already have their composite at least. So I didn't bother going back to them. And this is another composite here. Here, as you can see the similarities, the witnesses that were drawing these composites, when I contacted them decades later, they said, yes, this was the person they were trying to describe. And keep in mind what a composite is. It's a witness describing to someone who has never seen the suspect, sometimes days after, sometimes weeks, months, even years after the fact. They would describe it, and an artist, composite artist that had never seen a suspect would have to draw the composite. So when you consider all of that, this is a very good composite and a likeness of Jeffrey Dahmer. And this is Jeffrey Dahmer after he left Florida, just weeks after when he was arrested back in Ohio. And you can see he still has his Florida tan here. And he has a Band-Aid on his chin because he was drunk and he fell in the police department. Plus, they kind of roughed him up at the bar where he was arrested.
On Monday, July 13th,
Okay, I have another video here. This is of an abduction of another child in another series on another Monday, about the same time of day, by a white man in a blue van. Everything is the same as the Adam Walsh case, only one difference. Ginger Keaton was shopping for a dress, unlike Reve Walsh, she was shopping for a lamp. And that's about the only difference between these two incidents, other than Adam was only 6 and he couldn't get away. And this boy was 10 years old and he managed to get away from Jeffrey Dahmer.
1981, 2 weeks before the abduction of 6-year-old Adam Walsh, there was an attempted abduction of 9-year-old Terry Keaton in another Sears toy department in the Twin City Mall north of West Palm Beach by a man in a blue van.
That's got to be chilling now, especially to look back and know what we know about Jeffrey Dahmer and to realize that you were confronted, you were face to face with this man, and Adam's story very well could have been your story.
Yeah, it pretty much gives me goosebumps when I think about it. I mean, it was a really frightening day in my life. I mean, that whole night, I was up. I stayed up most of the night wondering, just how I was home, and I was pretty shook up.
After Terry's mother, Ginger, retrieved her son, she went to report the incident when she ran into the man that tried to abduct her son.
And then on the news, when they showed that Jeffrey Dahmer was beat up in prison and he died, Terry and I, we were just sitting in the living room and watching the news. And when they showed Dahmer, Terry just stood up and just started screaming, "That's the guy, Mom. That's the guy. Look at him. That's the guy."
The Hollywood police were too incompetent to make the connections between this and other attempted abductions by a man in a blue van and the abduction of Adam. Instead, they chose to go after John Walsh's house guest, James Campbell. Even though the Twin City Mall composites matched the Hollywood Mall composites, the Hollywood police dismissed the connection, saying the composites didn't match James Campbell. So instead of dismissing James Campbell, they dismissed all the witnesses from the Twin City Mall and the Hollywood Mall, as well as other locations. Even though other police chiefs called them to say the attempted abductions in their cities matched, they were dismissed as well. On July 26, 1981, 10-year-old Mia Taylor was in the Hollywood Mall the day before Adam was abducted, when a man in a blue van tried to abduct her 9-year-old brother, Joel. And again, on July 27, 1981, she saw the same disheveled man take Adam by the fingertips and walk out with him.
Had I not stopped him from talking to my brother, because like I was saying, he was really fixated on my brother. And had I not, told him, he knows nothing about that, and my mom had been coming at that same time, he probably would have taken my brother, and we would have never even heard of Adam being abducted because he would have been busy murdering my brother.
2 weeks later, on August 10, 1981, Adam's severed head was found in a canal off the Florida Turnpike. 4 witnesses reported seeing a man with a blue van at the exact spot where the severed head was found. One of these witnesses reported seeing a man with a blue van taking something round out of a bucket and throwing it into the water at 12:30 in the morning, 3 days before it was found. When the witness called the Hollywood Police Department, he was told,
Yeah, we already know about the blue van. It has nothing to do with the Adam Walsh case.
On July 22, 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested in Milwaukee for numerous mutilation murders committed in his apartment. One of those murders was a young boy named Conrad Synthasmphone. Yet the Hollywood police refused to even consider Dahmer as a suspect. They claimed young boys were not his modus operandi, even though Adam as well as Conrad's heads were decapitated. This was something Dahmer was known for doing many times over. Then the Hollywood Police Department decided to close the case and pin Adam's abduction and murder on an innocent man.
Willis Morgan is not just the author of Frustrated Witness. He is also one of many witnesses that were at the Hollywood Mall on the day Adam was abducted. Willis immediately recognized Dahmer from the encounter he had with him at the Hollywood Mall on the same day, time, and location Adam was abducted from.
The first time I heard that you thought Jeffrey Dahmer was the abductor and killer, I said, nah, how could that be?
Well,
But then as I read the book, I realized, boy, you're right. That's who it was.
right, back in 1981, I always knew the guy that I encountered in Radio Shack, just minutes before Adam was abducted, had to be the guy that abducted Adam.
Willis believes it was at this time that detectives realized the connection and went into full cover-up mode. Willis went back to the Hollywood Police Department and was told by detectives,
For all we know, you could have done it. You just admitted you were there.
and then threatened Willis with arrest if he returned. Frustrated Witness is a non-fiction true crime book that sets the record straight so everyone will know what happened to Adam Walsh. For more information, visit frustratedwitness.com.
Okay,
Microphone.
thank you. All right. Anyway, about several years after Adam was abducted, I was on my way to work on the night shift, and when I went into the press room office, our secretary, Monica, came up to me with a newspaper in her hand, and she said, Willis, is this the guy you saw in the mall? And I looked at the photo. Was this photo that you're looking at right here? And I said, no. And she said, are you sure? Because he's saying he did it. And I looked at it again. I said, no, that's not him. And then later on in the night, I read the article, and sure enough, this guy named Otis Elwood Toole was confessing to Adam's murder. In fact, he wasn't only confessing to Adam's murder, he confessed to hundreds of murders all over the country. And so police from different cities and different states were going to Jacksonville, clamoring at a chance to interview him so they can close cold cases in their own cities. But after many police departments realized that he had conflicting timelines that were clashing because he couldn't be in New Jersey and California at the same time committing murders, so they all dismissed him, except for one department, that was the Hollywood department. But eventually they even dismissed Otis Toole as a suspect. So Otis Toole was dropped as a suspect just literally months after he became a suspect. And then in 1987, Fox TV decided to come out with a new TV show called America's Most Wanted. And they were searching for someone to host the show, but because of Adam's case generating so much publicity and all, they decided to go with John Walsh as their host. So when John Walsh became the host of America's Most Wanted, he also wrote a book titled Tears of Rage. Now, the rage was over the way the Hollywood Police Department was handling his son's investigation. He was furious about it. In fact, he called them in his book the biggest bunch of stumbling idiots since the Keystone Cops. And when John Walsh became host, one of those detectives, his name was Detective Joe Matthews, who was on the case since its inception, called John Walsh, befriended him, and John Walsh remembered Joe Matthews was the one that exonerated John Walsh and his house guest, James Campbell. Now, Detective Joe Matthews, he was a homicide detective with the Miami Beach Police Department, but he also had a company called the Southern Institute of Polygraph, and it was the Hollywood Police Department that hired his company to polygraph the Walshes and James Campbell. And he exonerated everybody, including James Campbell. But the lead detective, Jack Hoffman, was furious because he did not want James Campbell exonerated, because as far as he was concerned, James Campbell was his suspect. He interrogated James Campbell for weeks, months, viciously. And eventually they stopped because John Walsh hired an attorney, Joe Varon. He was considered the silver fox, one of the best defense attorneys in Broward County at the time. So James Campbell was the prime suspect because he admitted during one of the interrogations to Jack Hoffman that he was living with John Walsh in his house. While John Walsh was out to work, he was having an affair with John's wife, Reve, for 3 years. And so they figured that was a perfect motive. In fact, he proposed marriage to Reve, and Reve turned him down because she had a son, being Adam, with John Walsh. And just 2 weeks before Adam was abducted, John Walsh told James to pack his things up and get out. So James left the house, and they were thinking this abduction was a targeted abduction out of revenge. And the lead detective was convinced that James Campbell was his suspect. So John Walsh, when he was befriended by Joe Matthews, thought that Matthews was probably one of the few detectives that got everything right, because he exonerated him. But that's probably the only thing he ever got right. John Walsh hired him as a senior lead investigator on America's Most Wanted. So now John had one of these bumbling, stumbling idiot detectives right in his midst, all along feeding him this artist tool narrative. Now, when I was working at the Miami Herald 10 years after the incident, in 1991, you can see the dates right here. This is the article that put a name to that face I saw. July 24th, 1981. I found this article on microfilm, and it was kind of blurry, so it's retyped. But these are the photos that were in there. This is exactly the wording that was in the article. And when I saw this face here, we were doing paper check in the office. We had about 8 people. We get papers from all the presses. We line them up on a long table, and we go through them to make sure everybody has the correct pages. And I saw this, and I stopped. And I said somewhat loudly, "This is the guy. This is the guy I saw in the mall." And I heard voices saying around me, "Willis, what are you talking about?" And other voices saying, "Calm down." Well, I was about as calm as I was going to get, because I was convinced. I knew right away. That photo was seared into my memory. So I knew this was the guy. I recognized him instantly, and I didn't even know this guy ever lived in Florida. This is an article about something that happened up in Milwaukee. This guy murdered a bunch of people in his apartment. But I already knew that this was the guy. And then later on in an updated edition, the final edition of the Herald, another article came out and said this guy was living in South Florida back in 1981. And that's all the confirmation I needed. So I went back to the Hollywood Police Department immediately, the next morning. And I tried to tell them what happened again. And the detective that took my interview said that Jack Hoffman is on the case, and he would give me a call back, but he wasn't there at the time. He was on vacation. It took about 4 months for Jack Hoffman to finally call me. In the meantime, I went to the Miami Herald Library, which was actually a storage room because they didn't have newspapers on computerized, so everything was hard copies. They had a large storage room. They had copies of every newspaper that was ever printed. And if you wanted to search for something, because this was a service, a paid service that you could do, but since I worked for the Herald, they didn't charge me. And I wanted to get a photo of the composite of the guy from 1981. So when Jack Hoffman finally called me up, I had that composite when I went back to see him. And I had a mugshot of Jeffrey Dahmer. I went back to see Jack Hoffman, and I showed him the composite, how this is the same guy. This is a composite from, this composite is not from the Hollywood Mall, though. It's from the Twin City Mall, from that video you saw earlier. one of the composites from that incident. And I didn't realize that Miami Herald gave me the wrong composite. But I showed it to Jack Hoffman, and he looked at it, and he goes, I don't see it. They look nothing alike. And I was flabbergasted because everybody else I showed it to could see the connection, the similarity. But I didn't realize it at the time that I had the wrong composite, and it was Jack Hoffman that dismissed the Twin City Mall incident because James Campbell, his suspect at the time, didn't have a blue van. And that was his suspect. He was convinced it was James Campbell. Like we said earlier, he dismissed all the witnesses from the Hollywood Mall, from other locations, including the Twin City Mall, as being related to Adam. So he dismissed everything. And now, when I went back to him, his jaw dropped. I could see the look in his eyes when I showed him that, and he went into full cover-up mode. There's an old saying, when you mess up, never fess up. And that's what they were doing. Back to Jeffrey Dahmer. In I believe it was 1979, he joined the Army. His father made him join. Took him to the recruiting station and made him join. And this is Jeffrey Dahmer's Army photo when he joined from basic training. This is another photo from basic training. Jeffrey Dahmer's here on the right. He's setting the sights on an M60 machine gun. And we have another photo of Jeffrey Dahmer in Germany here. You could see he's passed out drunk on his bunk, and he's got a bottle of Thunderbird here. And because of his drinking, he was ended up being discharged out of the Army. And when he was discharged, they gave him a ticket to any city that you want to go to. And this is what they do. This is what they did with me too when I was in the Air Force. They give you a voucher, actually, and you trade it in at the airport for any city within the United States. And so Dahmer decided he didn't want to go back to Ohio because he didn't want his father to know that he was discharged. And so he came to Miami. And when he was in Miami, he had about $800 in his pocket, $1981, but he was living in hotels, drinking up his money, and soon ran out, and he started dumpster diving. And one day, there was a strip mall. He was eating out of the dumpster. This guy, his name is Ken Halbert, he was the manager of a sub shop in Sunny Isles called Sunshine Subs. He was going out to dump the garbage at the end of the shift, at the end of the day, and he saw this young man eating out of the dumpster behind his store. So he asked him if he wanted a sandwich or something. And he went inside, made a sandwich, brought it to the guy. A couple days later, he went out there again. The guy was back eating out of the dumpster. So he asked the guy, he says, "What, do you need a job?" And he hired the guy. Now, Ken says about 10 days after he hired this guy, the guy was taking the garbage out one day because that was his job now. And he comes back into the store and he goes, in a very matter-of-fact tone, he said, "Hey, Kenny, there's a dead man behind your store." So Kenny goes out to look, and sure enough, there's a dead man there by the dumpster. So what does Kenny do? He goes back inside and he calls the police. The police come, and they ask Kenny, "Who found the body?" And he says, "My worker." So he said, "Well, get him out here. We need to speak to him." And that's how Jeffrey Dahmer got his name all over this police report that I'll show you soon. This here photo here is the meter room where I believe he brought Adam, and where Adam was murdered in this meter room right here. And the police refused to investigate, and that's why my original book, I have on the cover your standard crime scene tape saying "crime scene, do not cross." But one of my attorneys said every time she looks at this, she thinks it should say "crime scene, do not investigate." So that's why I changed the crime scene tape on my new book to "crime scene, do not investigate." And this photo you're looking at here is that same photo I put on the cover of that book. This is the police report that was made. And if you look at this report, you can see this is the dead man that Jeffrey Dahmer found. And on this report is everything that Mr. Jeffrey Dahmer says, because Mr. Jeffrey Dahmer was just a witness back in 1981. And all this police report does is parrots everything Dahmer says. Dahmer said the man went by the name of Bobby. He was drunk all the time. He had health problems. He wasn't feeling good. So the coroner listed the death as alcohol related. This is another page of that same report. And this is blood spatter on the back wall of that meter room. Now, back in 2007, ABC Primetime came down to, from New York down to Sunny Isles to do a TV show about this meter room after it was discovered. And they hired one of the best crime scene experts to go into that meter room with permission from the mall manager to investigate the meter room. And she's the one that found this blood spatter that she describes as being indicative of a high velocity homicidal pattern. Yet the police, the Hollywood police, refused to investigate it. In fact, when Detective Mark Smith at the Hollywood Police Department was asked about this, he says that it's possible two pit bulls got in there and had a fight. Right. And I went to Chuck McCulley at the Dade County Police Department myself, and I asked him about this because this Sunny Isles is in Dade County. So it's actually their investigation. It should have been anyway. And he told me that he thinks a bird flew into the wall. Because he said he sent one of his best detectives over there, and his detective said a bird flew into the wall. And there was a small bird like that big and had no blood on him on the floor on the opposite side of the room. And so I explained to Mr. McCulley, Detective McCulley, that if that was caused by the bird would have to be murdered because this was described as a homicidal pattern. And by Jan Johnson. And so he says, Jan Johnson, she's worthless. Do you hear me? Worthless. And I said, if she's so worthless, why is she the one that trained your police department? So, right. Anyways, this is the back of the mall, strip mall. This is the dumpster where the dead man was found on the other side of this dumpster here. And this little hallway here leads into the meter room. This here is another view of the alley. Of course, this is not the same dumpster that was there in 1981 because these photos were taken in 2007. This is another photo here of the back door to Sunshine Subs where Jeffrey Dahmer worked. So you can see the proximity between the back door and the dumpster right here. And the meter room would be just over this way here. Inside that meter room is also a trap door on the floor that leads to about a 4.5-foot high crawl space. And this is another photo of the trap door here before that junk was removed, when ABC Primetime removed it to do that TV show. And in that crawl space is a blanket with garbage bags. You can see these are black garbage bags here. Now, what is a blanket doing in the crawl space? You know, nobody would be sleeping down there. It was too hot and too humid, because I've been down in that crawl space. And these are what I believe to be possible murder weapons, because these were found leaning on against the wall where that blood spatter was found. Now, Jan Johnson did take samples off the wall to try and get some mitochondrial DNA from the blood spatter pattern. But since that was a concrete wall, which has lime in it, and Florida is very humid, and the time was 27 years later that she was unable to get DNA. And I myself went back into the meter room under the premise that anything I do is legal unless I get caught. And I got my own samples, and I also spent hundreds of dollars trying to get DNA, but I never was able to get it. Okay, now I'm going to show another video.
Adam Walsh was not Jeffrey Dahmer's only Florida murder. In April 2007, a police report with Dahmer's name all over it was discovered. On June 27, 1981, Dahmer was hired at a sub shop called Sunshine Subs, located at 17040 Collins Avenue. This was 1 month before Adam was abducted, on July 27, 1981. 10 days after Dahmer was working, he found a dead man behind the store where he worked. The man had only one shoe on. The other shoe was found inside the meter room just steps away from the back door to the sub shop. Inside the meter room was a trap door leading to a crawl space 5 feet deep. A blanket spread out and some garbage bags were discovered in the crawl space. On the back wall was blood spatter that was described as a high-velocity spatter pattern, indicative of homicide. And it didn't belong to the dead man as he had no blood on him. Possible murder weapons were discovered next to the blood-spattered wall by Willis Morgan, the author of Frustrated Witness. So there is a crime. Someone died in that meter room and the police refused to investigate. In an effort to protect a false narrative that pushed for Otis Toole's post-mortem condemnation as Adam's killer, Detective Joe Matthews says this about the meter room.
Joe Matthews says he has the answer right now. He says the room is just a room. Matthews is one of the original Florida cops who worked on the Adam Walsh abduction and is now an employee of America's Most Wanted. Matthews, to put it plainly, is not buying the Dahmer theory.
What if? That's your whole theory. What if this? What if that?
With the exception of Joe Matthews, other experts believe Dahmer is guilty.
Dr. George Palermo, a psychiatrist who examined Dahmer for trial, says he always believed there were more victims.
I firmly believe that Dahmer did not have a 10-year free period from criminal activity of such a time.
Former cop Joe Matthews is still putting his money on someone else. What do you think happened to Adam Walsh?
I think Adam was abducted and murdered by Otis Toole.
Detective Joe Matthews and former Assistant State Attorney Kelly Hancock had the audacity to stand behind a grieving Walsh family as they celebrated by shaking hands after yet another innocent man gets convicted of murder in 2008. John and Reve Walsh have now become so contently adjusted with their closure that John Walsh now considers Matthews to be his best friend and colleague. But with friends like Matthews, Adam will never get true justice.
For my family, there's been no justice.
For more information, visit frustratedwitness.com.
Yep, that's him right there. Now, I needed a photo for this book because this book without a photo of Joe Matthews. Oh, sorry. Okay, I needed to get a photo of Joe Matthews, and I knew that he would never authorize me to use one of his photos. So what I did was I would send people to his book signings, similar to what we were doing here today, armed with cameras and mic'd up, to listen in on his book signings and get a photo. So this is one of the photos I managed to get. Now this here is a negative photo of an image that Matthews uses to pin Adam's murder on Otis Toole. He received this photo. It was a roll of photos. I think there were 96 photos on the roll totally. And this is the one that he claims as soon as he looked at it, his eyes bugged out of his head, and he knew instantly he saw Adam Walsh. But it's not this photo he's claiming. He took this photo, flipped it over, inverted it, rotated it, and zoomed in on a small portion of this photo, and he uses that image in his book that he wrote, this book right here, Bringing Adam Home, pinning Adam's murder on Artist's Tool. And this is the photo that he claims is supposed to be this photo, but this is the real photo right here. This is the photo in Joe Matthews' book. He took this somehow from that other photo and made it into this photo. I don't see that other photo in here. I guess maybe in here somewhere, if you zoom in, you know, but I don't know. I think I see Elvis in there too, so. And his publisher, HarperCollins, added this little sketch at the bottom here to help readers find Adam.
Frustrated witness.
Okay, now, originally Matthews wrote a manuscript called the Matthews Report, and this is the report that he used to bamboozle the Hollywood Police Department into closing the Adam Walsh case. And after the case was closed, I filed a lawsuit against Joe, as well as the Hollywood Police Department. And all of a sudden, because when Joe wrote that manuscript, he said that he wrote it because he wanted police departments across the United States to use it as a guide on how to solve cold cases. So I went to the Hollywood Police Department and I asked them for a copy of it because they used it to close the case, so it should be part of the public case files. But all of a sudden, they claim they don't have a copy of it. They never had a copy. So I sued Joe Matthews for a copy. But all of a sudden, he refused to show it to me or anybody else. So this is another video I put together with my book versus Joe Matthews' book.
Versus Bringing Adam Home. Jeffrey Dahmer versus Artist's Tool. Frustrated Witness is a nonfiction true crime book about the Adam Walsh case. This is about Adam Walsh witness Willis Morgan versus Detective Sergeant Joe Matthews, who worked on the Adam Walsh case since its inception. Frustrated Witness was written so everyone will know the truth of what happened to Adam, versus Bringing Adam Home, the book that was based on a manuscript that Detective Joe Matthews named after himself, the Matthews Report. This was the report Matthews used to bamboozle useful idiots at the Hollywood Police Department into closing Adam's case and pinning Adam's murder on an innocent man named Artist's Tool. Frustrated Witness is about serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer being the real murderer of Adam. And this time you will learn from all the witnesses. This is about truth versus fiction. Frustrated Witness, second edition, is written by Willis Morgan, who was just one of nearly a Yankee Stadium full of credible witnesses that have implicated Jeffrey Dahmer. Matthews considers himself to be a seasoned cold case homicide detective, but the very basic tenet of investigating a cold case homicide is to use due diligence and call all the witnesses. Matthews said he painstakingly reviewed every scrap of information in the case files, but he's never given Morgan and others like him a call.
Now, in this particular case, I re-interviewed every single witness that was still alive.
When the TV show America's Most Wanted first aired.
Okay, I just want to pause this for a second because I need some help here. Okay, I just wanted to pause this because you just heard Joe Matthews claiming that he's interviewed every single witness that was still alive. Yet, in this book, you will not see my name or any other witness that was at the Hollywood Mall or any of these other sites. The only witnesses he's interviewed were cellmates of Artist's Tool who would say things like, yeah, everybody in prison knows he did it. And that's the witnesses he uses in his book. He's never called any of the witnesses because I tracked all the witnesses down. And you can hear them for yourself in my book. So that's a falsehood right there.
On February 7th, 1988, Matthews, who was working on the Adam Walsh case since its inception, befriended John Walsh and was hired on to America's Most Wanted for 12 years as the on-screen senior criminal investigator. John Walsh now had one of these quintessential bumbling, stumbling detectives right in his midst, all along feeding him misinformation about his own son's abduction and murder for years. Similar to the Stockholm Syndrome, John and Reve Walsh now sympathize with the very people that have victimized them for so many years with misinformation, cover-ups, and a false closure. John Walsh has become so contently adjusted with his closure that he now considers Matthews to be his best friend and colleague. The second edition of Frustrated Witness sets the record straight, so everyone will know what happened to Adam Walsh. For more information, visit frustratedwitness.com and justiceforadam.com.
Okay.
We are back and you're watching your channel.
I'm not going to play too much of this because this is a TV show that Joe Matthews went on, as well as his author, his co-author, Les Standiford. And what's interesting about this is if you were in the audience here, or these hosts, you would have completely convicted Otis Toole from what he says. This shows you how easy it is to convict somebody. And this is why we have people on in our prisons and even on death row that have been found innocent with DNA. And I list some of those cases right here in South Florida that have been imprisoned. And one of them is Frank Lee Smith, who spent 14 years on death row for a murder that he didn't commit. And only after he passed away from pancreatic cancer was the real killer captured with DNA. And in the meantime, while Frank was in prison on death row, this guy, Mosley, committed 11 other murders. And this is Matthews bragging about how he solved the case. He goes on numerous shows and brags about it. In fact, some of the shows I've called them after, because most, especially podcasts and radio shows, they have their shows listed on their radio show sites. And you can just do a simple Google search. I would type in keywords like Detective Joe Matthews, Adam Walsh, and things like that, and podcasts, and I would come up with a radio show that he did, and I would call the radio show and explain to them who they just had on their show. In fact, I did that with this show here. This was in Tennessee. I called them, and they would invite me on the show, and sometimes I would go on with other witnesses and completely refute everything he's saying. And I even asked some of these shows to bring Joe Matthews on, but don't tell them that we're going to be on. Just tell them they want to do a follow-up show. But they would end up messing it up and telling them that we're going to be there, and obviously Joe Matthews refused to be on. But I'm going to just play about a minute of this just so you can see what he has to say on TV.
We've been talking this morning with best-selling author Les Standiford and Detective Sergeant Joe Matthews.
Bringing Adam home, of course, the case of Adam Walsh changed everybody. It was an incredible case, and everyone remembers it from 1981. You say in the book, without a shadow of a doubt, who murdered Adam Walsh.
Is there more evidence out there, or was there evidence out there that even the police were not aware of?
And that's what we base it on. We don't base it on a opinion, we base it on actual police facts. Not only it's so compelling because I found witnesses to the abduction. I found family members that were remorseful. They never came forward, but they were never asked by the police of the perpetrator. Yeah, I'm sorry.
And the perpetrator was?
Otis Toole. Otis Toole family, 1 month after Adam went missing, he started bragging about it. And he felt bad about it because it was the youngest child he had ever killed.
So he had killed others?
Oh, he was a serial murderer.
Okay, first of all, Otis Toole was not a serial killer. The only murder that he's known for is a 64-year-old person, John Sonnenberg, who passed away several weeks after a building was burnt down that he was living in, and it was set on fire by Otis Toole. And he died of third-degree burns. Now, as far as what Joe Matthews is saying here about these other witnesses, some of the witnesses that he's talked to, he claims he talked to, and he claims they made statements to him that I have proven since they couldn't have made. As an example, it's well known throughout the internet that Otis Toole gave a deathbed confession, and his niece, Sarah Patterson, is the one that made that claim. But Sarah Patterson passed away at the age of, I think it was 50, and so there's no way to get a hold of her. But she did leave some evidence behind through interviews that she did with the Broward County State Attorney's Office, where she claimed that the last time she ever visited her uncle was about 9 months before he passed away. So that's not a deathbed confession right there. And then in the interview, she calls Matthews an idiot. And so this is what he does. He uses people that have passed away, claiming that they say things that have proven they couldn't have said just by their interviews. Another one is Barry Grimilli. Matthews claimed Barry Grimilli, who was in charge of the infirmary where Otis Toole passed away, he claims that Barry called him and told him that he overheard Otis Toole's confession. But I read the case files where Barry Grimilli was under oath interviewed by the state attorney's office in Broward County, where this is what Barry Grimilli really said. I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have the quote right in front of me here. Barry said, "I was watching America's Most Wanted one night when John Walsh came on and said something about a deathbed confession that Otis Toole gave. Well, that's just not true. Otis Toole never opened up and never talked about anything." And there's other witnesses he does the same thing to. Another one is a young boy that Matthews claims was put out of the store by the security guard with Adam. And his name is Joel Conkerham. And he claims that after Joel was watching America's Most Wanted one day when they were doing an episode on the Adam Walsh case, that Joel called Matthews. Remember, Matthews is the senior lead investigator, so he was handling all those calls. And he claimed Joel said that he was put out of the store, one of the kids that were kicked out. Well, I never could find Joel. But then when I read Matthews' book, Matthews mentioned that Joel had a sister, Mia. So I searched for Mia, and I searched everywhere, and I finally found her. And Mia completely disputes everything that Joe Matthews said. She said, first of all, her brother was not playing any video games with Adam, and he was never kicked out. She was there with him in the toy department the entire time. And so Joel's not here, and Matthews says he said things that Mia says he did not say. He couldn't have said that. And he does this numerous times with witnesses. Matthews' goal was simply to set out and pin a murder on an innocent man. You know, there's an old saying, show me your suspect and I'll show you the evidence, and that's what he does. Now, as I said earlier, I needed to get a photo of Joe Matthews for my book. And this here happens to be one of my favorite photos, because this is my sister as she talked Joe and Les Standiford in posing for this gotcha photo. So I had to put this in my book. In fact, I sent 2 people there, 3 people to this. This was in off of Atlantic Avenue in Deerfield Beach. So I had a friend take the photo here, Dolores, and my sister is in this photo. So, okay, so that's my presentation. Thank you. One other book, if anybody's interested in reading other books about the case, I have a hard time recommending this book, but it is an important book. But this is also a good book, John Walsh's book about his son. And it's interesting to read this book and see how it comports with my book, as well as this book here. And this here is a father's story. This is written by Jeffrey Dahmer's father, who, by the way, several months ago passed away. And this is Life with Jeffrey Dahmer. Okay, I guess we're going to open this up to questions now?
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
All right. So if anybody has a question right here?
Track down the witnesses.
Okay, when they closed the case in 2008, they gave out free copies of the case files on a DVD. And they were only given one copy per news outlet. And so when I went to ask for a copy, they said, what news outlet are you from? And I said, I work for the Miami Herald, which I did, worked, past tense, I was retired. And they said, oh, somebody already has a copy from the Miami Herald. So I got another reporter that did get a copy because he said he was from the a newspaper that was almost non-existent. And they gave him a copy. We went over to Kinko's, which is now what, FedEx copy? And we made a copy for me. And that's how I got a copy. When I started looking at them, at the case files, and I saw that one composite from the Twin City Mall, that's when I realized that I had the wrong composite when I went back to the Hollywood Police Department, that there were other incidents going on. Okay, in the back?
Hi. Question, this is sort of a neutral question. Do you know if John Walsh has ever been back to the mall area just to look around or just...
No, but what I can tell you, I think maybe next month, America's Most Wanted is coming back. He's going to be hosting it with his son Callahan.
So did you get rid of that guy? Where is he now?
Oh, he's hiding under his bed.
So he's...
Is he still on?
Yes, but you know, he hasn't done any more radio shows, TV shows, or anything, and I don't think him and Wes are friends any longer. And I haven't heard from him, so.
I lived a few blocks from the mall at that time, and I remember this happening. And it seems that the Walshes had a very strange household. They had somebody, a man living with them, and supposedly he was having an affair with Mrs. Walsh.
Yes.
Oh, did you say that?
Yes, James Campbell.
Oh, James Campbell, I missed that.
I just want to say something. It was an excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I was living here when this took place. And I had 3 young sons. It was very, very frightening, as it was to everybody that had children. And it got worse because my husband was the Walsh's dentist, and he's the one that had to identify the body by the teeth.
Right.
Really extreme.
Yeah. The sad part is there are people out there that are claiming Adam's still alive. Yeah. I mean, which is pretty despicable. I mean, I've been to the Hollywood Police Department and I filed lawsuits against them to be able to view the case records. And I went into a room and I looked for all the case files. They had one big box of photos. And it was hard, but I looked at the photos of Adam's severed head when it was pulled out of that canal. And one of those photos, after it was cleaned up, you could see it was Adam. There's no question.
Have you ever spoken with John Walsh himself and told him your theories, and what does he have to say about that?
Well, Well, John Walsh wants nothing to do with anybody unless you go along with his narrative that it was Otto's tool. I have been to Reve's house, and I have left my book, a copy of it, at her gate. I put it in, I wrapped it up in plastic so in case it rained, and I tied it to a gate. And for all my efforts, I've been blocked from their Facebook page. So I've never heard from anybody. The only one I talk to now is Megan.
They all live in Florida, or?
I'm not sure where they're all at. I believe Reve Walsh is still in Vero Beach, and Megan is somewhere in Central Florida.
Yeah, I'd like to know why you did not go directly to the FBI. This is a federal crime.
Right.
I don't understand why you wouldn't have given them all that information up front.
I've been to the FBI so many times, they started locking their doors when they saw me coming. They would tell me, this is a local case, we don't get involved in local cases, you need to go to the Hollywood Police Department.
But it was a kidnapping. Kidnappings are federal.
I know that, yes, and it was across state lines. But if you have Dahmer as your suspect, but if it's Otto's tool, it wasn't across state lines.
I have always wondered, where was Mrs. Walsh when Adam was abducted? Was she still in the mall? Did she go home? The rumor was that she was with her lover.
No.
Does anybody know?
Yeah, she was in the lamp department, and she left Adam alone.
She was still in the mall.
Yeah, she left Adam alone in the toy department, which was very common back in 1981. So you can't fault, I hate when people try to fault her. Because Ginger Keaton, as you saw in the video, did the exact same thing with her son. In the Twin City Mall, she left him in the toy department. Everybody, it was common.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah, I worked at Sears that day when he was abducted, and the police did come and interview me, a lot of employees. I had left, I think I worked till 2 o'clock, and I came in the next day. And of course, like you said, children were always missing. You always heard over it. We have a child separated all the time. And that was not uncommon. And they did search the store. I worked in the visual department upstairs from the catalog department. The wife even came up and looked and was shocked when she saw the mannequins in the back of our department, which was shocking if you've never seen a bunch of mannequins standing there. So yeah, they did.
Dahmer would have loved those mannequins.
Yeah. So anyway,
he was known for stealing mannequins out of stores.
And the other days, and then people started bringing their children in on leashes. But previous to that,
Yeah.
kids ran wild.
So let me ask you, did you know where Dr. Sheldon Myers was at?
Yeah, I know where his office was.
Right, as you walk in the south entrance, right there on the right side. Yeah, I've been to just about so many stores in that mall.
I started working in that mall in 1967.
Wow.
And worked for many, many years at
Right.
Sears.
Yeah.
So, I know that mall
Yeah.
by heart.
Dr. Sheldon Myers was my optometrist, so, yeah. In the back?
What happened to the security guard?
In fact, 2 years ago, I was up in Tennessee looking for her because I wanted to try and let her know that she has good standing for a lawsuit. But I couldn't find her, and the neighbor across the street said they moved to Texas 2 weeks earlier, so I missed her by 2 weeks. And her husband, I have talked to her husband several times. He wants nothing to do with the case. And I tried to convince him that they have a really good lawsuit because they use the security guard as their scapegoat. You know, even HarperCollins, when they wrote the book, they published the book. They're responsible for this false narrative. They destroyed her life. She has to live with being the one that put Adam out when she never put Adam out. I have all the witness statements and the timelines in my book. She had absolutely nothing to do with it. To give you an example, Reve, when she said, this is Reve's own statements from her own interviews. She says when she returned to the toy department, after she was shopping for a lamp, Adam was gone. But all the other kids were still there. And she kept trying to ask the other kids if they saw her son, Adam. But they were too busy to answer because they were playing their video games. And finally one Spanish boy answered and pointed to the west door by the garden center. And she said she was thinking the west door, Adam wouldn't have gone out the west door. They came in the north door. So she was thinking that this young boy didn't either understand English or he just was too busy playing his game to respond. So she ran out into the corridor, running up and down the corridor of the mall looking for Adam, ran back to the toy department, and all the kids were gone. So what does that tell you? Adam was already gone. Those kids that were all gone were kicked out by the security guard after Adam was already abducted. And I've always believed that Adam's abduction could have been the commotion that caused them to call security. Because all the witness says he was screaming. He didn't go easy. He protested as much as a 6-year-old could. But the narrative that's been put out by this book, Bringing Adam Home, is that the security guard kicked Adam out and he was wandering around in the parking lot and Otis Toole saw him and offered him candy and Adam willingly got into his car. That's the narrative. They closed the case. And none of that's true. So, I mean, I can list numerous witnesses that saw Adam being dragged out of the store. Philip Law, for example. He was going to the Hollywood Mall. And he lost his parking space because his blue van was parked in the fire lane right by the garden center. And a bus had to go around the blue van. All the traffic was jammed up, so somebody grabbed the parking space that he had in mind, so he had to get a further parking space, and he was really upset about it. When he went into the mall, he saw this guy grabbing this kid, or carrying this kid, out of the store, and the kid was screaming, "You're not my daddy, you're not my daddy." And he turned around and started walking backwards, watching this, thinking that, something's not right. And he tried to remember, but he couldn't remember everything. So he said he concentrated on the boy. And when he went to the police and told his story, actually he didn't actually go to the police, he went to the state attorney's office. Well, he did go to the police at first, but they dismissed him. He talked to Detective Mark Smith, who was in charge of the case at that time, and told him his story, and Mark Smith dismissed him. So he went up to his captain, Detective Dunbar, who also dismissed him. So he worked his way over to the state attorney's office, and Phil Mundy, who is in charge of the investigations at the state attorney's office, also dismissed him. Even though he described Adam to a T and everything, they dismissed him. Everybody's in cahoots on this cover-up. Another witness is Janice Santomassino. She almost ran into the back of the blue van as she was coming around the corner. It was parked there, and she almost slammed right into it. And when she went into the mall with her daughters, she was going to report the incident to security about the van that was parked in the fire lane. But when she went into the mall, she discounted it and forgot about it, and she brought her daughter to the toy department. When she saw this disheveled man standing there watching the kids, and he looked completely out of place. So she also saw the blue van. And Bill Bowen was pulling into the parking lot. He was going there to change his address because he was moving to Birmingham, Alabama. And he saw a guy coming out of the garden center exit. There was a blue van parked there in the fire lane. And this kid was being tossed into the blue van, as Bill's quote, like a sack of potatoes. And the kid was screaming, saying, "You're not my daddy, you're not my daddy." And he just tossed him into the blue van and jumped in the van and sped off. And Bill says to this day he can still smell the rubber. But like I said, all these witnesses tried to call the Hollywood Police Department. They kept getting answering machines. And when they would finally get someone, they would be dismissed, or they were told that they would get back to them and they never would get back to them. This was the mayhem that was going on at the Hollywood Police Department in 1981. And John Walsh is right. They were the biggest bunch of stumbling, bumbling idiots. So, and that's why the case never got solved properly. All right. Thank you.